So let's talk about the international church for a second. It's not hyperbole to say. I mean, you're probably the most traveled person I know in touch with the church throughout the world. I was with a mutual friend of ours that it's just this week who he's pretty in touch himself, and he was saying, "Oh, when I really have questions, I go to Don Carson." Could you give us a sense of what's going on in the world, in different parts of the world with the church? Are you encouraged? Are you discouraged? Give us a little bit of glimpse into things you know going on around the world and what you've seen.
Am I encouraged or discouraged? Yes. What you have to see is that where the church is experiencing blessing, there are some commonalities, but there are also some differences. If I speak at a university mission in the Western world, and I do regularly, I guarantee that one of the first questions in open Q&A sessions and so on will be, yeah, but that's just your truth, isn't it? We all have our own truth. But I've spoken at universities in the Middle East. Nobody says that. Everybody thinks there's a truth. They just debate over who's got it. So what seems to be an inevitable position of postmodern epistemology, to use the technical expression in the West, has got nothing like that kind of power in the Middle East. So that you have to debunk some of the ways in which Western thought exercises a hegemony over everybody, and realize that there are a lot of people that don't think that way at all, and that also means that you've got to make some adjustments when you're preaching and teaching, not changing the gospel, but how you go about it. When Paul preaches in Acts 17, to pagans that are brilliant, they're in Athens, but they don't know the Bible. The way he organizes his material is really quite different from when he's writing to a bunch of converted Jews, where they do know their Bibles. And so learning to preach and teach and so on in different contexts is partly a function of understanding the culture that you're planted in. And sense of humor is different. Ways of showing respect are different. Sense of humor is different. You go to Australia and they have the expression they want to cut down the tall poppy. You know, a poppy grows out of the ground and it's beginning to be a bit of a stuffed shirt, cut it down. And so a lot of their humor is debunking. And I love it. What can I say? I join right in. But in some parts of the world, in China, it's never like that. In China, I'm the Reverend Professor Dr. Carson, who's finally above 60, so he's worth listening to. I'm in Australia, and every 10-year-old calls me Don. I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I'm just saying that they're different. And so one of the things you learn as you travel is the number of things that are culturally variable that aren't really all that important, but they're fun, they're interesting if you got a sense of humor. And then as for the church itself, there are some parts of the world, many parts of the world, where it is extremely costly to be a Christian. Some places where the church is flourishing anyway, and some places where it's all but stamped out.
What about the American church? So you have been involved in different facets and in a leadership role in the American Evangelical Church really for 5 decades. You've seen it go through different transitions over these decades. Could you kind of talk us through what you've seen over 5 decades of these are the different kind of movements that I've seen happen in the American Evangelical Church, and where do you kind of assess that we're at right now?
It's very hard to answer because it's different in different parts of the country, for a start. And it's different according to the terminology that different parts of the country use. When we started up the Gospel Coalition, the question you must ask is, why do you call yourself the Gospel Coalition as opposed to the Evangelical Coalition? Gospel and evangelical mean the same thing. You just come from a different language group. Why do we call ourselves the Gospel Coalition as opposed to the Evangelical Coalition? One of the reasons is because in New York City, according to Tim Keller, evangelical means roughly Protestant jihadist. Now, that's not what I mean by it. It may come as a surprise, but so if you're trying to use terminology that people understand, we chose a term that nobody understands, gospel, and then fill it with our own content, which we think we can defend biblically. But I remember Carl Henry saying 25 years ago that he was wondering if the term evangelical was still useful in this country. Yeah. And others are saying the same thing now. They don't want the term evangelical anymore. Yeah. I answer differently. We have to maintain the term evangelical because it is a biblical term. You don't want to abandon terms that are biblically mandated. Euangelion is a Greek word. Euangelizomai is the verb. You've got to use it, or words that mean exactly the same thing. Call it glushmak. As long as what you mean by it is evangelical, I don't care about the sound. But you've got to preserve the word itself because it's a biblical word. So if you look at the evangelical movement, evangelical church, and define the term evangelical sociologically, then what you do is you ask what groups call themselves evangelical, then you analyze what they believe, and that's what evangelicals believe. You can analyze it historically. What groups have called themselves that in the past? How are they linked with our current groups? You can argue it means something politically. You're an evangelical if you're for Trump. You're not an evangelical if you're not. And so on, so on, so on. And all of these are held with various degrees of fervor by different kinds of people. And I would say a plague on all your houses. I want to say an evangelical is one who believes and holds to and tries to conform his or her life to the evangel of Jesus Christ. Now let's talk about what that evangel says. And now we'll use our Bibles and different passages and so on, so on, so on. In other words, you need a biblical theological spectrum for defining what an evangelical is. Now, if you do that, then a significant percentage, undoubtedly the majority, probably the vast majority of people who call themselves evangelicals are not evangelical. I've read statistical surveys, for example, that show that 57% of American evangelicals don't really believe in the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. But they call themselves evangelicals. God have mercy. And so you can go down all the cardinal doctrines, and they're evangelical because they've gone to an evangelical church, and that's it. Or else because they do vote for Trump or whatever, or against him for that matter. And what we need to preserve the usefulness of the terminology is Christians who will try so far as they are able by God's grace to use such biblical words the way the Bible uses them and distance themselves from all other use. So it's not that these other questions are not important. The historical rootage is interesting and is important, and for some groups is determinative. The sociological profile, you need to know something about. That's why we didn't use evangelical, but used gospel in New York City. I don't mind using evangelical in New York City, but I got to have half an hour first to explain what I mean by it. If we can get back to listening to what the Bible says and to use our most disputed terms the way the Bible uses them, and to be careful about baptizing other terms, we'll be in a lot better grounds toward building common agreement and common confessionalism. There is no doubt, everybody's commented on it, a turning away from traditional Christianity in the evangelical, broadly conceived movement. so that there is a rising percentage of people who are often referred to as the nuns. That is, what religion do you hold? Catholic, Protestant, Mormon? None. None. There's a rising percentage of nuns. So it's not referring to women in black garb, but nuns. They have no confessional religion. Well, that's true, but in one sense, it's tragic. At one level, it's got some good to it too. It's becoming a little clearer who's a Christian and who's not. Who's a Christian merely by tradition and heritage, and who's a Christian by confessionalism and personal faith. So when I look around the country and ask what groups are fruitfully planting churches, with rare exceptions, they're churches that are full of the vibrancy of life and of genuine confessionalism. There are some groups that call themselves Christians that are currently stacked up on health, wealth, and prosperity gospel. That's very strong in Nigeria, for example, dangerously strong, and still in Latin America, it's strong. It's strong in some quarters here, but something that is recognizably evangelical, theologically evangelical. The churches that are doing the best job at planting new churches from nothing, not as opposed to stealing sheep from other churches, are those with a strong confessional. Acts 29, some of the best RTS churches. These are churches where it might cost something to be a Christian, but it's a cost you're willing to pay because that's where the truth is. And so I'm not discouraged I'm discouraged by a lot of confusion in so-called evangelicalism. But we were talking at supper about university missions. I'm no expert in university missions, but I've been doing them off and on for 50 years. And during that time, I've seen some remarkable changes in student perceptions and the questions students ask and so on. For the last 15 years, every 3 years, I go and give a lecture or two at Berkeley, and usually draw 700 students. And I can say anything I want. And I think it's easier today to preach evangelistically at Berkeley or just about any other university in North America than it was 20 years ago. Because 20 years ago, there was still a significant percentage of American students who were rebelling against the religion of their parents. So they had something to be angry at. Nowadays, they're so bone ignorant, to be brutally frank, that they don't know enough to be mad at me. And they will listen so long as you treat them respectfully and answer their questions and engage and so on. It's quite straightforward. I mean, I remember one meeting there a couple of years ago. A faculty member attended and asked me what I thought about something or other, and I tried to explain, and he said, "I don't believe any of that stuff." Now, what do you say at that point? Well, you're going to hell. What I said was, tell me what you believe and why. And we had a conversation going in front of hundreds of people that was mutually respectful, and people listened, and some of them were hearing the gospel they'd never heard before because this guy asked a question that reflected his unbelief. You know? So I think if you're willing to put yourself out there, it's easier today than it was 25 years ago. They don't know enough to be mad at you. It's also changed by virtue of the fact that there are more Asians in our universities nowadays for all kinds of immigration and other policy reasons. And Asians, by and large, it's a generalization, but Asians, by and large, have more respect for old people than most Westerners do. So they look at me and my advancing years and they think, oh, I got to pay him some attention. The guy's 76. Listen up. That's not the way Americans think. I passed my sell-by date when I was 25 in America. But that cultural reality in the universities means that you can get all kinds of discussions going because of the different demographic. So, I don't know, it's a great time to be alive. I mean, all the things I'd like to plant more churches. start another coalition. I'm getting a bit past it now, but on the other hand, this is not a time to throw in the towel and give up. It's a time to see what God's going to do next, and I'm pretty excited about the possibilities. Even if there's a good whiff of persecution, it might help to purify the church a little more. Not all bad.